Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking ancient Nerubian civilizations. We are talking the Black Empire, we are talking regicide, and a million different references to past WoW lore, and of course, as always, we are talking Xal'atath and the effect she's having on all of the events of next expansion, because today we are doing a deep dive cinematic analysis on Threads of Destiny, the new, as Blizz call them, 2.5D cinematic that we assume is going to be the first of a series of 3 leading up to the War Within's release on the 22nd of this month, which, by the way, is 2 weeks away. These animations are a staple of new expansion build-up, starting in Mists of Pandaria with the Burdens of Xiao and continuing ever since, probably reaching an all-time high with BFA's Warbringer series, although I'm probably not alone in thinking that Dragonflight's holding form of a 3 cinematic long conversation between Nosdormu and Emberthor was one of the weaker series, certainly one of the least exciting on a visceral level. So what I really wanted to see from War Within's installments was something that reignited, for the want of a better word, hype for the upcoming story and its characters. Let's see if it managed it. It did. And of course, the usual disclaimer for these videos applies. This is not a reaction video. This is going to be a terrible way to watch this cinematic if you haven't seen it already, because we are going to be stopping and starting and talking all over the top and just generally having a good old nerdy time. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, join us as we talk Threads of Destiny and the moment when Xal'atath got scary. Okay? Go, 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 go.
Slender is the strand that guides our destiny, known only by true sacrifice.
I love this opening shot of the spider busily wrapping up its next meal in its web, partly because I like the idea that literal house spiders as we know them exist in the Nerubian capital of Xal'atath. That'd be like us having tiny little feral humans running around eating bugs in our home, but also for the obvious symbolism, because you know I love me some obvious symbolism, and here it is right at the start. The web on display here is obviously referenced in Ansurek's narration. The slender thread that guides our destiny sums up her entire outlook on life. The idea that destiny can only be fulfilled by strong actions, often sacrifice. Ansurek clearly believes that it is very possible to miss your destiny if you aren't willful enough and give up your chance. It's very reminiscent of the Shakespeare play Macbeth, as actually quite a lot of this cinematic is. The idea that when someone is allowed to believe their destiny involves power and greatness, they can be nudged into doing pretty terrible things. It also brings to mind the Shadowlands and their threads of fate, but I don't really want to speculate too much about any connection with Shadowlands at this point, if that's okay. But this opening image, and yes, we are still literally talking about the opening shot, sorry, works on a wider level too, because of course this cinematic is about Xal'atath as much as the first final raid boss of the expansion, Xal'atath, who weaves a web of her own through this story, who lures her prey to willfully walk into danger and who then feasts on the results.
In our kingdom of Azj-Kahet, no one understood this sacrifice more than Queen Nefes, my mother.
I really like the setup of this scene. I love the voice actor playing Ansurek. I think she's brilliant. And I like this opening image of Queen Nefes in front of the city, the massed and mighty. This is an image that's going to be echoed again at the end of the cinematic. So there are some things that I would like you to remember about it that might not seem significant yet, but you're just going to have to trust me, okay? Firstly, the Queen's hand position here is the lowered steeple. And in body language, it's one that indicates listening and the characteristics that we associate with someone who listens. Wisdom, generosity, thoughtfulness. And so you don't get the impression that this huge army is about to attack anyone from this image, and subconsciously the Queen's hand position helps convey that to you.
I saw this when the Black Empire came to conscript us for their last stand at Ny'alotha. My mother refused them.
Boy, oh boy, do I love this image of the Faceless One here. Huge, square, like an obelisk that you'd find in the city of Ny'alotha itself. And I really hope this isn't just a cool drawing someone did for this cinematic. I really hope that we see some of these beings from the void in the next expansion or two that have this stillness, this heft and authority. It's absolutely awesome. And the narration is conveying some very important information here, telling the story of how these Nerubians rejected the old gods, which we knew, but what we didn't know until now was just how badass they were in severing their connective thread to their masters by Nefes pulling on the magical threads of her own.
My mother refused them.
For this treachery, your line will sever itself. This kingdom will wither with the waning of your worth.
Which worked like a kind of voidy cheese wire and slices the Faceless One into slabs of shadow meat, and I love that. I love the unflinching singular motion that she performs it with, literally pulling on the thread of destiny to set a new course for her and her people, so simply like a Thanos snap. And this is the only time in the entire cinematic, as Nefes shows her strength, that we see her hands raised any higher than her waist, her arms not clutched into her body. And keep your eye on that as we go through, because we've seen the power that she can wield. It's important that she chooses not to show that off at any other time. She keeps her body contained in her own personal space. It's humble, and I'm bringing it up because there's an obvious contrast later on, I promise. And I love how the Faceless One's prophecy in the moment of his destruction comes true.
Your line will sever itself. This kingdom will wither with the waning of your worth.
Also very Macbeth-like, and perhaps a reflection of how the Void sees all possible outcomes and sees them all as being true. This is the moment that our big fleshy dude realizes, oh yeah, this is the path we're on. Oh honey, I've seen this one. It does not end well for you. And I'm afraid I am going to have to take a moment here to talk about timelines, because there is a lot of debate about when this event exactly takes place. There are basically two possibilities. One, the last stand of the Black Empire at Ny'alotha that they talk about could refer to the end of the actual Black Empire on Azeroth, the war against the Titans, which the Void eventually lost, which would date the intro of this cinematic at literally hundreds of thousands of years ago, and all the characters in it therefore being hundreds of thousands of years old. Or it could be referring to the end of the Fourth War, as in patch 8.3 in Battle for Azeroth and the Visions of N'Zoth patch, which would make it about 7 years ago. It's a pretty big important difference. We've had people arguing both cases in my stream chat. I've seen both scenarios stated as absolute fact online on big websites, and if I'm completely honest, the reason this video is a bit later than I'd like is because, seriously, look at how long it is, but also because I have spent hours combing through everything I could think of, all my War Within footage, the art book, interviews, everything, and I can't find anything definitive. There's even a Radiant Echo event where you play through the aftermath of this cinematic, and even that doesn't give you a hint as to actually when it happens. So I may be wrong, or I may have missed something, and I don't mind being wrong on this if someone can correct me, but I'm going to go ahead and say that this scene is indeed set hundreds of thousands of years ago, the fall of the actual Black Empire rather than N'Zoth's vision of it in BFA. I think the language they use in the cinematic itself, I saw this when the Black Empire came, and the slide of BlizzCon's What's Next panel, which says they are ancient survivors of the Black Empire, and the way we later see that Nefes knows Xal'atath, apparently from those Black Empire days, and also just because it's way cooler in my opinion this way. And if I'm I'm not completely sure about something, I'm always tempted just to err on the side of whatever's cooler. So that's how I will be treating it. Like I say, I am happy to be corrected if there's some clarification out there that I've missed. It could be either for sure. But if this is the OG Black Empire trying to conscript the Nerubians, then that means the last stand of the entire Black Empire happened at Ny'alotha, and I think that's just a really interesting little lore reveal. It also means that the Nerubians are basically immortal in terms of their lifespan. Anyway, that is something I would definitely like to hear your opinions on below. Let's move on.
Her strength defined us that day. And in that moment, we felt destined for greatness.
We can see that this defiance of the Black Empire has a formulative effect on the young Ansurek. She sees it as a sign of her people's strength, and that strength becomes the characteristic that she grows up to value above anything else. When she talks about her people being destined for greatness, it's not her people living in peace and innovating, it's the troops she's looking at. Her strength is not a moral or historical one, but one of pure force and physical might.
But in the years that followed, our greatness was tarnished.
I love the time transition in the shot here, the stark contrast of how time has changed in the city so much. Not just a very obvious colour palette change, the colours becoming more washed out, but the mighty soldiers standing against literal gods at first, reduced then to standing in between the starving populace and their own leaders. It's so effective. The timeline question is of course important here too, because if this cinematic does start in BFA, then all of this decay and stagnation has happened in just 7 years, which is a startling decline for a civilization. Alternatively, yeah, it could have taken hundreds of thousands of years to have gotten to this point, which would make Nefes's line, "I believe better days will come," quite funny to be honest, because it's like, yeah, how long have you been waiting exactly, Queenie?
Look at them out there. Wretched. Starving.
I am not immune to our people's suffering. I believe better days will come.
Not if you keep failing to seize the moment.
No wonder Ansurek's getting edgy. And this scene is great because it shows us how each of these two characters does have a pretty good point. Ansurek is correct to be worried about her people, to want to do something. She is right that her mother is kind of being neglectful of the starving wretched.
What was the point of you freeing our future, only to leave us buried in the past?
You comprehend so little. There is much for you to learn before you can be queen.
Mother!
Nefes says, "I am not immune to the suffering of our people," but is she though? She lives in a palace protected by the army and with everything she could want. It's much easier to be old and wise and patient in that situation. But I also think it's important to point out that all of the characters you meet in Azj-Kahet in War Within questing love Nefes. She was an incredibly popular leader despite the state of the city. And that makes me wonder, don't forget, we are being told this whole story by Ansurek. Is it possible that the decline of Azj-Kahet is greatly exaggerated in this fiery princess's mind? So we have our setup. We have our two diametrically opposed characters, so we have our drama. Now we can begin the action, the actual story of this film. And thank you so much for setting it in this chamber in the City of Threads dungeon with the gigantic, I always call it a fresco, but I guess it's a carving, right? This awesome scene depicting an old god literally lording over the city. With the strange crystal in the top corner. As you might imagine, there has been huge speculation about this carving since the day it appeared on the beta. Who is the old god? What is the crystal? An obvious answer to that question is that it's Beladar, the giant, sometimes light, sometimes voidy crystal that pierces through the cavern ceiling in the zone next door, Hallowfall. It could be. I'm not saying it's not. It just doesn't look like it to me. It's purple and gilded and green in game and just doesn't much resemble Beledar for me, even when it's purple and voidy, something that the Arathi say has only started happening relatively recently. So for me, this crystal has always represented, well, Xal'atath, actually, the Harbinger, the emissary from the actual Void Realm, keeping an eye on all the fleshy servants to make sure they are doing their jobs properly. And of course, it could be either, or both, or something else entirely. That's just always been my read on it. This next sequence is obviously what the entire animation is about, and I love how unashamedly horror movie it all gets from here on in.
Ansurek? Are you seeing this?
The stopping of time and the flame's motion being suspended is just so extra, and that voice. It sounds like a male voice breathing out as the flame stops. It sounds to me a bit like Fish N'Zoth, or it could be the voice of the Faceless One echoing across time in this, the moment his prophecy is about to be fulfilled. The Ansurek, are you seeing this line is a little bit goofy, but it does show us that even though Nefes has been dismissive of her daughter's opinions, literally turning her back to her and walking out of their earlier conversation, Ansurek is still her closest ally and confidant, the first person she thinks about or turns to when weird shit starts to go down. But then we get a moment which will go down in WoW history.
You have heard my voice in your dreams, Great Queen.
The iconic arrival of Xal'atath, crawling out of the carving, which represents either Beledar or, Xal'atath. Like the girl from Ringu, proper horror movie vibes, and this is just cool by itself. But it marks a very important moment, which I think should not be underestimated, because I think this entrance and this cinematic is when Xal'atath went from being an interesting baddie with a cool design to a legitimately good baddie. Her appearance and her actions here elevate her threat and presence way beyond anything that we have seen before. This is an antagonist that can carry a story, in my opinion. This is where Xal'atath finally became scary.
The Harbinger.
Yes.
And can we just mention how big she is here? In-game, this carving is massive. The Nerubian queens are massive. Xal'atath is terrifyingly huge here. So much more Void Mummy to step on you. Everyone is a winner. Is she actually physically appearing here, or is it in the queen's mind? Honestly, it doesn't matter one tiny bit. It's functionally the same. I love all the whispers and the flashbacks. This image of Zal being literally worshipped godlike by the ancient Nerubians and appearing very much like the crystal in the carving. The flash of the blade of the Black Empire that she was later imprisoned in. Are these visions of the actual past being shown to us, the audience, or the dreams that she has shown Nefes? Or both. I think it's probably both, to be honest. I think it definitely is the dreams she's been having because of the way it lines up with the dialogue, but I think it's probably genuine memories of the Black Empire too. It's been pointed out that Xal'atath didn't look like this during the Black Empire days. She's only been in this body since we killed the High Priest Inanis in BFA and gave it to her. But I think you can actually explain this in a number of very interesting ways. If these really are snippets of Nefes's dreams that we are seeing here, obviously then it would make sense that Xali appears in this form in them. But it also totally works if these are actual flashbacks to the Black Empire too. An idea I like because again, it's just cooler. It could be that this is just dramaturgical, that we, the audience, see Xal'atath in her present form because it's easier for us to recognize her that way, and also because Blizz doesn't want to give away her true form yet. Man, I'm looking forward to that reveal. It's a suspension of disbelief kind of thing. The idea I like even more though is that, well, Inanis didn't look like this when we killed her. What if this is just what Xal'atath makes all of her mortal bodies look like? Because this is just how she likes to look, and she recognizes the importance of strong branding when you're turning entire civilizations to the void. We know that she has inhabited other mortal forms before she was trapped in the dagger, and I really like the idea that she twists each one to look like this. A highly believable scenario because honestly, who wouldn't want to look like this? I think this is also backed up by the way that Nefes clearly knows who Xal'atath is, and I don't think that's like, oh, I recognize you from my dreams. I think that's like, oh, I remember you from hundreds of thousands of years ago when we both existed in the Black Empire together, in the same way that Locust Walker recognizes her from, presumably, Koresh. Another reason that I favor the idea of these being actual memories from the Black Empire is the color palette. This washed out sepia is obviously a stark contrast to the big purples and blues that we see around Xal'atath and Void stuff in general, and it's a color that we associate with stuff from the past because it's the color of old photographs, but it is also the color that these 2.5D cinematics have established specifically as being how the Black Empire is presented. It's how N'Zoth and Ny'alotha appeared in the Ashara Warbringer, and the bloated corpse of N'Zoth that we see in this cinematic when Xal'atath tells us the old gods are dead fits into that theme too. I love it. Also, on the subject of the color palette and it being so strongly associated with the presentation of the Black Empire, well, that suddenly makes this key art way more interesting, doesn't it? Where the voidy purple of the Xal'atath background contrasts with the sepia tones of Silvermoon. We see Xal'atath in this palette too, when Xal'atath says,
"And a shadow has fallen on your kingdom."
Feels like the same might be about to happen to Silvermoon at some point. I love how obviously threatening and simultaneously complimentary Xal'atath is, calling Nefes Great Queen before swooping through her personal space like a wild-eyed banshee. She actually does this quite a lot in the cinematic. Please notice how she is constantly changing her position, swooping behind the character that is the main focus. This is obviously very disarming for the person in question, but it also shows us where she likes to be, the influencing force on someone's shoulder. And what comes next, of course, is Xal'atath laying out her plans, her offer to the Nerubians.
The old gods are dead. The empire lies in ashes. And a shadow has fallen on your kingdom. But the blood of the old gods can make your people powerful again. Your reign could last for eternity.
I love how she says old gods, using a completely different emphasis to how most of us say it. And another sidetrack just for a moment, sorry, but this vision of the Nerubian being turned into a super soldier by the blood of the old god, I just need to talk about the tentacles. Yeah, I know, bear with me. In the WoW lore community, there has been a theory going around for years now about Chronicle 1. So the final page of this book has this image showing the 4 identifiable old gods and seemingly an unidentified being along with them. Now, at the time, as you can imagine, people went nuts, like, oh, is this a 5th old god? And it was fun to speculate about. But now we've basically had the 5th old god confirmed in recent years and texts, so it's worth taking a little bit more seriously, I think. And look at the tentacles of the 5th old god here, because they're pretty unique. Do they remind you of anything? And honestly, this is what we have been missing from Xal'atath in the story so far. Seeing her actually making the deals, tempting others into corruption. And because this power is connected to the blood of the old gods, her offer is obviously very reminiscent of the way Gul'dan tempted the orcs with the blood of Manaroth.
All you have to do is take my
I love the composition of these shots here as the camera pans down, obscuring her eyes as her outstretched hand extends to Nefes. A bandaged hand, of course, because, you know, her body is a dead elf, but also as a subtle reminder of what usually ends up happening to people that deal with the Harbinger. But remember what I said earlier about that constant inward arm and hand position of Nefes? I hope you noticed that as we watch more of the cinematic, because her whole thing is she doesn't accept deals or help. Her strength is personal, contained. She rejected the Black Empire, and rejecting this new offer of power eternal is something that she is able to do. And we've had that character shown to us via her body language throughout.
Your words are tempting, but the cost is too great. I would never risk my kingdom for such power.
Mother, who are you talking to?
And then, probably my favourite moment of this entire cinematic. When Nefes turns Xal'atath down, it takes all of half a second for Xalatath's eyes to shift. No other change in her facial expression. For her to move on to the next potential ally, one she's already laid the groundwork with before even making this offer to Nefes. And I think this ruthlessness, this forethought and willingness to just throw in a bad hand and move on to the next one is so great for Xal'atath. Probably the best representation of the Void working to corrupt and get its way that we have ever seen in WoW. I love it. To be the best example of that in WoW is a pretty low bar, but this is still very good. I love how Ansurek is discovered in shot directly behind her mother, indicating that she is the next, literally in line, waiting her turn.
Who are you talking to?
Oh, ghosts, dearest. As always, they are my ready counsel.
When Nefes says she is talking to ghosts, it is played out in front of this huge shot of the carving. It certainly feels like this city's previous masters really are ghosts that still haunt everything, despite how strong Nefes was in rejecting them. They've never quite managed to truly shake them, you know?
I'm not sorry for what I said. I only want our people to be great once more.
There's a very on-the-nose line about making Nerubians great again, a line which I usually wouldn't bother mentioning, but I find its use here quite interesting of how it mirrors an idea that we're seeing quite a lot in our country at the moment of wanting to return to an imagined greatness from the past. Because don't forget, Ansurek doesn't think her people were ever great. We believed we were destined for greatness, she says, and her whole motivation is that she's angry they never achieved that potential in her mind. So when she says she wants to make her people great again, that pastime she's referring to is one that by her own standards never existed. It's a really great illustration of how that kind of nationalistic thinking often works, and as we will see, how that feeling can be harnessed to make people do stuff that they wouldn't usually do.
Greatness is fleeting. What we must do now is endure. Your time will come, child, but only when you are ready. What have you done?
You're not the only one seeing ghosts, Mother.
And when the inevitable moment of betrayal comes, it's not surprising, and honestly, it's kind of a relief. I mean, I like Nefes, okay, but she was about to go on another speech like we've heard plenty enough already, just in this cinematic. Imagine if you were Ansurek and you'd had thousands of years of this. I think you'd have done the same. Obvious echoes here of Arthas killing his own father in Warcraft 3, Nefes's "What have you done?" mirroring the "What are you doing?" from that cinematic, and in both cases the answer is basically succeeding you. I love how we get this shot from the point of view of the Queen, with Ansurek coming into focus like she is just seeing who and what her daughter is truly for the first time. And even though it's obvious, that line,
"You're not the only one seeing ghosts, Mother,"
followed by Xal'atath's hand on her shoulder, is electric. It also mirrors the opening scene of the cinematic, when we saw Nefes in profile standing against the Black Empire. In the moment she showed her true strength, well, this is the moment Ansurek shows her true strength in the other direction, literally facing the other way, with the Void now at her back. back. And of course, unlike her mother, she's not doing it by herself. She's got a helping hand. And I love how even with her big round spider face, you can see the disappointment that grips Ansurek here. She idolized her mother, and the power that she wielded made it her entire own personality. And the bitterness and resentment that she feels for her mother's perceived unwillingness to ever use that power again is what made her such a prime target for Xal'atath, who revels in mocking the fallen queen.
How sad to have a queen so wise, and yet so ignorant to the call of destiny.
Her name is Xalatath.
This manic facial expression, obviously so expressive and genuinely unsettling, but also noticeable because it is, after all, only the third Xal'atath facial expression we've ever gotten after serious and sexy smirk. The sound design is incredible here, with the distorting bass notes playing over the incessant whispers that reflect the probably years of work that Xal'atath has put into this moment. And the absolute banger line from Ansurek, her name is Xal'atath, showing how well and truly her allegiances have switched, though she would argue that her loyalties have always been to her people and remain so.
You had your chance, Mother. With this power, Ashkahet is unbound. We will rise. We will conquer. And together, we will finally claim our destiny.
Long live Queen Ansurek.
And the final shot of this piece again brings to mind that Ashara cinematic and the final image of the Naga Queen having made her deal with N'Zoth, having been transformed into a reflection of N'Zoth in many ways, with her new transformed people, with the new master filling the background. There's even drums playing in the background here as well, just like in that Warbringer, albeit not as prominently. It is a very obvious point of comparison, but I think the more important contrast is with Nefes at the beginning of this animation, because where she stood with her hands in a listening position, careful, using her immense power sparingly, here we see the new Ansurek with her hands, two of her hands, in a raised steeple position, a position we associate with strength and action and leadership, her other arms outstretched in a way that we never saw Nefes do, but which we have seen from Xal'atath. So that's the difference, right? Here is a woman of action compared to her mother, who is slow and inflexible. On the face of it, yeah, but there's a kicker to this image, isn't there? Where is the city? Queen Nefes stood in front of her city, defending it and her people from the void. That imagery is gone from the Ansurek version, taken up instead by swirling purple clouds and Xal'atath herself. The city, the people that Ansurek would argue she is doing all of this for, are notably missing from the composition now, and that's not an accident. One last thing about body language, because of course I say that the raised steeple shows action, leadership. Well, that's not necessarily true. That's what it's traditionally shown, but of course, because of that, it has been adopted by loads of people, CEOs, politicians, people who want to project that power. They know this is one of the ways you do it. I think the association we now have with someone who uses this hand position is someone who's trying a bit too hard to be something that they're not. And I think that's fitting, because whatever Ansurek thinks she's fighting for, whatever she tells herself, really, she's serving Xal'atath now. Really, she is doing exactly as she is told. And I don't think it's unfair to speculate that as the final boss of the first raid of the War Within, it feels pretty unlikely that Xal'atath's promise of a reign that will last all eternity will actually come true. The long-live Queen Ansurek feels as hollow as when the witches hail Macbeth at his coronation, as empty as when she calls Nefes mighty queen before having her killed. Ansurek isn't the spider that we saw in the opening shot of this cinematic. She's the fly, following what she ignorantly thinks is the thin thread of her destiny, so blinded by her desire for strength and power that she doesn't see that she is walking straight into the waiting web, and where the architect of that web Xal'atath now gets to feed. And there we have it, the Threads of Destiny. I feel like I could probably talk about this one for another 15 pages, to be honest, but I want to actually get this video out at some point, so I think we will save time speculating about the next cinematics in this series for the weekly reset coming this weekend. Suffice to say though, my current thinking is that the third in this series, if there is one, will be more like the Sylvanas Warbringer, as in, I think it will play in-game for the first time in the introduction quests to the War Within when the game goes live on the 22nd, just 2 weeks from now. And as such, I think it will cover the big event that kicks off that expansion. And I'd like to bet that it literally uses an image from a very famous Legion Harbinger cinematic as part of that. Cryptic? Yes. Come and watch the weekly reset to find out more, and join us for the next of these analysis, maybe, I guess, in a week. But what do you think about everything we brought up today? What's your opinion on the timeline, on the visions, the carving, Xalatath's role in the Black Empire? What super obvious thing have I got completely wrong? Because there's always something. Let us know in the comments below. And thanks for joining us today. If you like this video, don't thank us, thank our patrons who give their actual real life money to make all of our work happen. And patrons, seriously, thank you, because without you, there would be a whole lot less Taliesin Warcraft. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Platinum Wow. No, my name is Taliesin from me and Evie too. Until next time, cheerio.